My parents were from humble upbringings. My mother, both my parents are from North Carolina. Their parents, on my father's side, there was college education. On my mother's side, her parents didn't go to college, but education was stressed because for African Americans, there weren't a lot of jobs. I mean, in North Carolina, you had the mills, you had the tobacco industry, you had a lot of that, and those jobs were not made available for African Americans. So my parents knew that in order for me to be a success, I had to get an education. But I had a good role. My mother finished college. She went on to graduate school. She got her master's at NYU. And we spent summers in New York while she got her master's. And then I was telling you the story, in 1958, she happened to get a scholarship to go to the University of Chicago for a year, which in 1958 for an African American woman in North Carolina leave her family, I mean, that was heresy. And she told my dad, who was 13 years older, and I was 10 and my sister was 5, that she was going. And you know, my dad was but my mother says, well, you can take care of the girls and I'll be back at Christmas time. And my dad just kind of went, ultimately, okay. If she hadn't gotten that job, I mean, she hadn't gone to school to learn the new math, doors wouldn't have opened for her. My dad was a scientist. My dad finished college in 1929, Johnson C. Smith. He was valedictorian of high school, valedictorian of college. He couldn't go to medical school because his parents didn't have that kind of money, which always, you know, was in my heart. They didn't have a lot of money, and he got his master's at Indiana University, which was interesting in those days because Indiana in those days was still pretty racist. And he talks about how, you know, there were about 2 or 3 black kids on campus, how they were separate. This is 1939, how they were separated and stuff. But my dad, again, you know, it's all about, let's just forget all that and let's just persevere. So he got his master's in 1939, and then he became a science teacher in high school, taught me in the 8th grade. And everybody wants to know, what'd you call him? Well, I called him Mr. Newell. And then he went on to college. So they both ended up at Winston-Salem State University before they retired.
You had a tough situation as a teenager going to high school. Tell us about that.
So I integrated, my first high school that I integrated was Needham B. Broughton High School in Raleigh, North Carolina. And it was pretty tough. This was 1963. And you went to school having, you know, being called the N-word pretty much every day. My dad would drive me to the school in the morning because he taught at the black high school across town. And I'd have to sit in the auditorium studying my studies. And I guess I had been there for about maybe 6 or 7 months, something like that. I was a pretty smart kid. And these kids, and it was bad. I mean, when I first came to school, what struck me was that nobody wanted to sit next to me. You know, we'd have science class, and I don't know if anybody remembers those old science desks where you have 2 people sitting. Well, nobody would ever sit next to me. And then in science class, it's all about touching. So a rock would be handed to me, and I would turn around and hand it to the person in the back, and he would let it fall on the floor and go pick up a towel and pick it up, and then everybody in the room would laugh. And so that's what I had to deal with. My teachers, there wasn't much that they could do. You know, of course, they called for everybody to stop laughing and stuff like that, but you know, you're humiliated. Well, this went on, and then the first grading period came out, and I was 100 A, 100. So one day I was sitting in the auditorium, and I looked up, and these kids are standing over me, and I'm like, they're going to beat me up, or what's going to happen here? And they said, Deanne, they call me Deanne, and we wanted to know if you would help us with our homework. And I looked around, and some of the same kids that were in my science class, that I remember distinctly one kid who let something drop on the floor and laughed, was in the back of me asking me to help him with his homework, and some of the other girls. And I said, sure. So we had a little tutorial program in the morning in the auditorium, and I went home and told my mom. I would tell my mom when I started integrating to high school that, you know, I don't know how much I can take of this. You know, being called the N-word every day, people not sitting next to you, in pep rallies. You know, that's supposed to be a fun time of your high school. Pep rallies. For me, pep rallies was always not in my stomach, because I would go into the gymnasium, and if somebody was filed behind me in the gymnasium, the whole row would be left vacant. so that they could start a whole nother row. So there were either 2 or 3 kids sitting in front of me, and then everybody, of course, would laugh. It was awful.
That must have been heartbreaking.
It was awful. Mm-hmm. And I would go home, though, and tell my mother all of this, and my mother would be reading or something, because she didn't do much cooking, but my dad did all the cooking. And I'd say blah, 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 and she would just brush right over it. She wouldn't mention one word about, well, these kids. She would just say, well, did you get an A in class today? That was about it. And then we just kept it moving. Not once did she ever tell me, well, maybe you need to come home, or I don't think you can deal with it. She just would look at me and say, well, did you get an A? I got a lot of A's.
I would imagine there weren't too many African American women going into the profession of infectious diseases when you did?
No.
Did you have any incidents during that time in terms of feeling that you were going to have to work harder than someone else?
Well, once I got to that level of my career level, racism was always mixed in with sexism. So it was very difficult to discern which was which, because my training was done in Ohio, and so it was difficult to tease out whether or not the discrimination, or if I felt any. I don't recall that I really did, because I was such a strong person. But in those situations at that level, it can often be enmeshed. So it's different to tease out what's sexism and what is racism. So no, I think there probably were only about, in the United States, African American women at the time that I went in, 10, and that's being extremely generous. I might say 5. I might just say 5.
What are you most proud of as far as your career goes?
That I'm still doing it. I should have been retired, but I don't have, what else would I do? I love infectious diseases. I've always loved infectious diseases. I love to teach. One of the reasons that I haven't retired is that I still feel I have a lot to offer. And infectious diseases is fun. It's like you come in and you're like Sherlock Holmes. There's somebody has a fever, or somebody has some situation and nobody can figure it out. And then the cavalry arrives, and it's infectious diseases, and we figure it out, and we give the person the right antibiotic, and they get well. And it's a happy feel. And all the infectious disease people that I've ever worked with, they're smart, they're funny. We don't allow not funny. And they still enjoy what they're doing. Many of us, when I go to the Infectious Disease Society of America, many of us are still my age. We haven't retired because we love what we're doing. And now with coronavirus, they still need us.
That's right. You recently got an award.
I did. It was like getting the Academy Award for infectious diseases. I received the Watanabe Clinician Award of the Year from the Infectious Disease Society of America, which I was stunned. It was, and the important thing about it is that it was named for Dr. Cha-Cha Watanabe, who was one of my mentors, who's from Youngstown. He's from Thailand, but he worked here at St. E's. And the award, which is a national award, was named for him. So the fact that I got this award from a mentor who's from Youngstown, and I'm from Little Youngstown, it was incredible. So I went to Washington, D.C., and stood before all these people. There are a couple thousand in the audience, and just I had 4 minutes to tell my story, and I told my story, and I got a standing ovation. So it was great, and I think that for me, to get an award from your peers means everything, because that's just saying, we know what you've done, we know the impact that you've had on infectious diseases, and we admire you for doing it. There's just no better award, really, other than a patient telling you thank you.
Built for the 21st century American workforce, Eastern Gateway Community College has 2 campuses and is a national leader in online learning. EGCC.edu is a digital gateway where 30,000 students are quickly transforming their financial futures through degrees, certificates, transferable credits, and higher paying jobs. And now, residents of the Mahoning Valley can enroll in summer classes for free. It's the EGCC Summer Guarantee, Eastern Gateway. America's new workforce starts here.